How does the culture impact mental health? Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome everyone to Let's Talk About It podcast by SafeTalk, where we cover all things mental health that are rarely talked about. I'm your host, Fauza Maisara, and today we are going to be exploring the complex relationship between mental health and cultural expectations in Malaysia. But because the reason why we want to focus on cultural expectation in this episode is because a lot of us are aware of mental health now, but sometimes cultural beliefs and even family dynamics can get in the way with it and make it tricky to deal with. So to help us unpack and understand this, we have invited a lovely guest for our episode today. So with me is Miss Gurmin Kaur Pandir. So welcome, Miss Gurmin. She's a registered and licensed counselor from Karakara. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Fauza. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good as well. So glad to finally see you here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we've been planning and finally this is our session now.
Yes.
So before we kind of get into the topic, right, I would like to know how long have you been working in this field and, maybe share a little bit about your background as a therapist.
Okay, so just before coming into the line of mental health, I was actually in human resource.
I see.
And then I was a teacher. So until I found my calling in this field, so then I decided to proceed to being a mental health therapist. So along with my training, I think I would say probably a year and a half. So I've been practicing as a mental health therapist.
Despite the growing awareness of mental health, right, a large portion of Malaysians, no matter which generation, because sometimes we try to assume that only older generation have this perception of mental health being like this and that, but sometimes even younger generations also hold on to the stigma of mental health, which becomes more harmful to our well-being. So as someone who works in this industry, would you say that this is true and concerning?
Okay, thank you, Fauza, for that question. I would say that it is true and it is concerning, despite the increased awareness on mental health to try and destigmatize it.
Yeah.
Based on what I've seen, what I've even heard from discussions with my colleagues, even with my clients during sessions, it is true. And it is believed that a lot of Malaysians still hold on to cultural, religious, even societal beliefs that does stigmatize mental health.
Yeah.
Now, culturally, for example, Asians, particularly in Asian countries, I believe, grew up most likely hearing or even viewing mental health as a sign of weakness or as a shame to the family, right?
Yep.
So a lot of times the individual then is reluctant to reach out to seek for help because they're afraid of being judged, condescended, or even mocked, right? So what they do, they tend to just keep it inside themselves and then obviously just suppress their emotions.
Yeah.
So talking about that, I actually remember when back in the days, not that I'm very old, but during my primary school days, I still remember the first time I actually heard the word Tanjung Rambutan was from my teacher, because she was trying to describe my classmate who was very active, was very happy. So instead of seeing him as someone who's just a very happy little boy, she could not handle him, and then she said things like, ini perangai orang gila, right? So then she affiliated Tanjung Rambutan to the place where mad people usually go to, and that was my first misinformation as well of mental health, right? And I think either she was told that was what the place was all about, or it could also be media. So I believe media also has a big part to play in stigmatizing mental health, especially back in the days. I'm not sure if you have watched a lot of Asian movies or Bollywood movies back in the past, where there's a stereotypical image of how a mental health person.
Even now, not every time it's like an episode. Okay, if it's an evil person, mad, crazy.
Exactly, right? So I remember growing up watching a lot of Bollywood movies where the stereotypical image of someone who's mentally challenged is either unruly hair or torn clothes or laughing hysterically. Basically, there was a lot of misinformation there, right? And if you ask me religiously, because this country, of course, we have got diverse, cultures, religion as well. So religiously, mental health is usually, I believe, seen as a test of God or God's will, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the time, if the child reaches out to the parent and he say that, oh, I'm not feeling very well, or I feel very depressed or blue, most of the parents would say things like, you'll be fine, go to the temple,
Yeah.
Go and pray.
Pray more.
Pray more. Or sometimes it's used against you, like, you see, you tak sembayang, right? That's why this is
Yeah.
God's punishment to you.
Yeah.
So it is concerning, if you ask me, because it can lead to further discrimination, prejudice, and
Yeah.
even social exclusion actually for those who are suffering from
Yeah.
mental health challenges.
Yeah, and it's sad because it's kind of 50-50, because one part of it people are actually recognizing, and because
Exactly.
I noticed like other therapists also mentioned the fact that there are starting more people to reach out for therapy services. So in a way people are more aware and like taking care of their mental health, but there's still like of course a group of people who believe in this cultural beliefs that are specifically just harmful for mental health.
Exactly. So there's a lot actually we can do to try and curb this. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, people are starting to understand the importance of mental health and self-care. But because we are used to our culture as Malaysians or Asians in general, sometimes we still prefer to adapt or tolerate harmful standards because that's how they can survive. That's how we learn to survive. Because even though, okay, mental health is good and I want to take care of myself, but as the example that you said, right, if you don't want to suppress your emotions, but if you were to open up with your family members, sometimes it can be more harmful than actually being quiet. And like the examples that you see, sometimes parents might end up saying hurtful things like, oh, you can anak jantan, why you can do this, and why are you so weak, you should just pray, and so on and so forth. So, and even apart from that, they might even look for any solutions, but actually going for a professional help like therapists or psychiatrists, that they might send you to, okay, this is the one that you need to follow, go for this religious classes and whatnot, but not the mental health help that they should be having, right? And that's the reality, because the feelings of shame and isolation and pressure are normalized in society. So if you could kind of explain, is there a way we can change that?
I think you brought up a very interesting point, because it is a double-edged sword, really.
Yeah.
Because in one aspect of it, some families actually encourage the children not to suppress their emotions and to express themselves. And when the very own child does express the emotions, then you are either judged, you are ridiculed, you are seen as a letdown, you are made fun of. Basically, you have brought shame to the family. So in return, usually what parents then try to do is they try to ask you to be resilient or to tolerate, and we are conditioned to adapt, in the name of resilience. But actually it's just to tolerate and just to basically just follow whatever that is being said or being asked to do, right? So it is a very concerning situation to be in. And I personally feel that if you ask me, it's a collective effort, not just as individuals, but also as a society as a whole. There is so much more we can do to bring change to the mental health, industry in Malaysia. Now, for example, we can try and reframe and challenge these thoughts by providing a platform, right, to promote or to increase awareness, education, empathy, active listening, even open dialogue in different aspects of the society, right? To start off with, let us begin from home, and then even at schools, even at workplaces, or even social events, or even places of worships, actually. So I think the way we can change it is, imagine if places of worships or workplaces or even schools, they organize like mental health screenings once a month, right? Or workplaces actually encourage their employees to attend therapy under their CSR, which is Corporate Social Responsibility, or EAP, which is Employee Assistance Program initiatives. So imagine the change that it might bring, right? Or even places of worship, if they are creative and if they could integrate like mindfulness and mental health with religion.
Correct.
Or even maybe they could organize support groups, for example, for parents or caretakers who are dealing with someone with mental health challenges. So little collective efforts like this, I believe, can definitely make a difference.
Yeah.
And as I told you just now about how media plays a big role, right? We are in the world of technology, and a lot of us have short attention span, so we prefer, or sometimes we learn better visually. So media can definitely play an important part as well in countering the misinformation of mental health. Like, for example, if you look at the latest movie that just came out, Inside Out 2, I absolutely loved it.
I haven't watched it yet.
You should, have you watched Inside Out 1?
Yes.
Yes, so it's really very well done, right?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that the way the emotions were introduced, even the way the character actually described anxiety, it was done so tactfully, so respectfully, right? So much so that when I was in the cinema, even though it was very silent, but you could almost feel like everyone felt relieved that finally there's a character that explained anxiety so well. So I think definitely collectively, if we all work in synergy together, it's a win for all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, the media or entertainment industry, it's like instead of using mental health as an entertainment that's like bringing more misinformation and labeling like, oh, it has to look like this and it has to be really extreme, you can still use it as a form of entertainment that is like bring comforts to other people.
Exactly,
and
why not?
Yeah, true. And like you said, with like places of worship, because I also have seen myself there's like events, I think it wasn't a podcast, there was a show on TV where they invited, like ustad, and then they also had doctors. They also have the someone with mental health, struggles as well. So that kind of conversation is more productive rather than just looking down on others and just saying, oh, you should do this and that. But you should be working together, one another. Yeah.
Definitely.
And now we're kind of touching more on society and also family. There's a term called Filial Piety. I actually didn't know about this term before, but I looked into it. It means that a cultural value seen in many it's a cultural value seen in many Asian societies, including Malaysia, right? And it basically means that we have to show respect, obedience, and care for our parents and elders as a way to show gratitude for their sacrifices. I think a lot of people already understand this concept, but can you explain a bit further and share some examples of filial piety?
Okay, I think you have summarized it quite well, actually. But probably I'll define it with a little bit more depth. So firstly, I would like to explain what filial piety is. So filial piety is actually a deeply rooted concept, that was first introduced by Confucius back in China during the ancient times, where there was roles to be played, right? So if I can make it a little bit easier and break it down, there are three parts of filial piety. The first part is being of service to our parents. The second part is to not disgrace them, or not to bring any shame to them. And the third part is to be of support to them. So these are the three main concepts of filial piety. Now, it may manifest in many different forms, but essentially it's almost like our moral obligation to be dutiful to our parents, to be loyal to the family, to uphold their honor by not disgracing them, to fulfill their wishes, and to pay back and be grateful for the sacrifices they made, either through monetarily or even through care in their old age. So, like I said, it manifests in different forms, but it is a very sensitive and a touchy subject to talk on because it is subjective and it can mean differently to different people depending on the dynamic of the home and the dynamic of the parent-child relationship, right? So it doesn't mean that if you have a good relationship with your parent and if your parent actually asks you to bring a cup of tea and then you go and say, oh, that's filial piety, why should I do that for you? So it's dependent on the dynamic that you share with your family, right? So, like I have even heard a lot of my clients sharing this, and even with discussions from with my fellow colleagues as well. So some of the common examples of filial piety, particularly in Malaysia, the first one would be to be grateful and to pay back for the sacrifices by giving monthly allowances to parents, right? That's the most common one. The second one is to be loyal and to take care of the aged parent, no matter how toxic that parent was. even if the parent disappeared from your life, abandoned
Abandoned
you,
you, yeah.
but as soon as the parent comes back, it's your moral obligation to take care of the parent. The other examples is to uphold the family honor, right?
Right.
By not bringing shame or disgrace to the family. For example, if you're a family of lawyers, even if you don't want to be a lawyer and you want to be a journalist instead, or even a dancer, right?
Yeah.
You will have to be a lawyer because you have to uphold the family honor, right? The other things are like you fulfill your parents' wishes by continuing the family business, even if you have no interest to do so. So these are some of the common examples. A little bit more of an extreme example once I've actually heard was that to uphold the family honor by actually having a male heir, right? So if the wife was not able to give birth to a male child, so the husband had to remarry again so that he could have a male child in order to uphold the family honor. So these are some of the common examples.
Yeah.
So like I said, filial piety can manifest very differently from the examples you've seen. It is very, very subjective, and it depends a lot on the family beliefs, the cultural beliefs, and mostly is the family dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, it really depends, because like if you have a healthy relationship, then of course you might think like there's no reason for me to be upset. But for others who are living in very toxic family dynamics, then that could mean like that could hurt them a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if I could just add on, because since I like to use movies as an example, if you look at the movie, I don't know if you've watched Mulan.
I've watched, but I barely remember.
Yeah, so Mulan is a perfect example of how filial she was as a child, right? So she's this Asian girl who had dreams of her own, desires of her own.
Yeah.
But the moment the father fell ill, and because he was an army person, so she decided to fulfill the father's wishes, and she disguised herself as an army person and went into the, I believe it was like an army camp. So she went through so much of challenges just so that she can preserve and uphold the family honor, which is why I said that filial piety can manifest very differently. It can be a positive concept depending on the dynamic of the family.
Yeah. And it's kind of scary how common it's still is, like in media, as in like movies and dramas in Malaysia especially, like, oh, husbands can do this and wives are supposed to be like this.
Exactly.
It's very restricted, and not a lot of people actually discuss on how much this can impact someone.
Yeah, which is why this topic, as I keep repeating, is very subjective and it's touchy and sensitive. So you've got to really objectively also hear this out.
Yeah. It's tricky, like take it take it with a grain of salt.
Yes.
Yeah. And as you said, right, I think most elders or parents would argue that there's no ill intention to this. It's like, yeah, it's your responsibility. I took care of you, now you have to take care of me. And it feels like it's just like a moral obligation, like you said, to ensure that your parents' well-being is taken care of, and that because there are parents after all. But while filial piety has positive intentions, can you explain how it can sometimes create problem to someone's mental health, especially when it comes to boundaries and expectations?
Okay. So this might take a little bit of time because I'll have to explain it.
Yeah.
So you are right. There may not be any ill intentions to it, because most of the time those parents of ours, they themselves might have grown up with this concept of filial piety that was normalized, right? So they do have these expectations that, the child must fulfill these responsibilities as opposed to wanting to fulfill these responsibilities. So filial piety can have like I say, it can have a positive connotation to it if the family dynamic is very, very healthy, right? So let me give you like an example. So if in a household a parent actually practices authoritative parenting style, then what happens is the parent would actually raise the child in an environment that is very conducive. There will be freedom of speech, there will be freedom of choice, there will be love, affection, boundary setting, respect. Then most likely that child did not feel suppressed growing up. So that child in return would view filial piety in a very positive way. Now the child is motivated by that very own upbringing to actually willingly be filial, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? Now, on the contrary, if a household has had a lot of conflicts, or there was no affection, no love, no boundary setting, no freedom of choice, freedom of speech, and parents actually use authoritarian parenting style as a way to suppress, as a way to
control.
to take control, to be more superior.
Yeah.
So the child grew up not being heard, not being seen, not basically having boundaries, or not having any choices. Most likely that child would view being filial in a negative way, because now they have to do it out of their own will, right? It's more like an obligation. They are burdened by it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? So if we can look at it in a diagram, like our thoughts affects our emotions, and our emotions contributes to our actions.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have these thoughts that, oh, my dad abandoned me, for 10 years, and then now he just came back, so now I have to take care of this old man just because he's old.
Yeah.
How do you think that would make you feel in terms of your emotions? You'll probably be angry, you'll be there'll be resentment, you'll be frustrated. So do you think it will contribute to you voluntarily being filial?
No.
Or you would do it out of obligation?
Yeah.
You would most likely do it out of obligation, right? So then the whole loop continues. So now you're doing it out of obligation, you feel more burdened, more irritated, your thoughts are amplified, your emotions are more amplified.
Yeah.
You are continuously in that loop, which eventually can lead to it impacting your mental health, right? So like I say, it totally depends on the dynamic of the family and the parent-child relationship. Having said that, some of us are able to cope better with obligations, where we are a little bit more okay with accepting and tolerating, where we will see it as, oh, it is my duty, this is my life, I'll just have to be okay with it.
Yeah.
But some of us respond to obligations very differently, and in return, it can impact our mental health. Just did that answer your question?
Yeah, that did. Yeah, and it's hard to find, like you said, right, boundaries and expectations when you didn't receive it as a child. Like, now you feel obligated, like, why should I do that when I didn't receive it in the first place? So it's hard to find that balance between understanding where our parents come from and also having that comfort, oh, I have my own choice, right? So in this sense, how can someone work through the fear of disappointing their parents when they want to take care of themselves? Like, they might be aware that, okay, I can take control of this, and I have my choices, but at the same time, I just don't want to disappoint them. How can you communicate this?
I think firstly, if you are let's try and be the devil's advocate here, okay, and try to understand where our parents are coming from. They are probably coming from a generation, like I said earlier, that practice filial piety even without questioning what it was. They probably did not even understand that concept. From a very young age, maybe it was an ingrained belief that since we sacrifice a lot as parents, now you as a child have to do a lot more for us.
Yeah.
So it's generational normalization, if you ask me, of filial piety, right? So that's why these parents grew up thinking this is absolutely normal, right? So they probably would question and even wonder, or even have expectations that, why is it okay for me, to do it for my parents, but it's not okay for you to do it for us, thinking that they are actually being filial or being resilient. But if anything, that was a generation of survival. It was a generation that did not know the concept of boundaries. It was a generation that did not have a choice, right? So if you try and reflect back, even now, right, if you look at our parents, you would see that they do have a little bit of people-pleasing traits, where they are very obligated towards the elderly because they did not know any better.
Right.
So if you really want to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, you can view it in that way. Now, there are a number of ways you can try and address your fear of disappointment with your parents. The first would be, if you have a parent that's willing to hear you out, you then communicate to that parent. You try and educate the parent what boundary settings are. You don't go gung-ho with the whole boundary setting, because then it will come off, as a shock to the parent. So you try and introduce boundary setting slowly, and also try and give them a few examples. For example, it's okay to be taking care of yourself, as well as you can still be slightly filial if you want to, but you shouldn't compromise yourself.
Right.
For example, you could tell them that, since you always want me to have dinners and lunches with you guys on Saturdays and Sundays, how about we meet in between? How about I do meet you guys for lunch and dinner on Saturdays, but Sundays are for myself. So you are also introducing the concept of boundary setting, but at the same time you're also being filial, if you can put it that way. So this is if you have parents that are willing to communicate and to hear you out. However, if you have non-verbal parents or parents who are not interested to hear you out, they're very superior, very dominant, then this may seem harsh, but you have to practice this concept called radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance, okay.
So I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so there's two parts of radical acceptance. Like I said, it may appear a little bit harsh, but the first part is you acknowledge, the second part is you accept.
Right.
You acknowledge that you are going to disappoint them. They are going to find you to be a useless kid, probably, disrespectful, non-dutiful, non-filial. You have to acknowledge that this will happen and it will hurt you. You will be upset. You will feel very isolated, very abandoned. Then you come to acceptance that it is what it is. It is beyond your control to force your parents to try and see it in your way. So if anything, you kind of have to be okay to disappointing them if you would want to practice some sort of boundaries and some self-care for yourself. Adding on to that, I must highlight that setting boundaries is not as easy, right? Especially if you're not used to it. It can get isolating, it can get pretty lonely, especially when people are not used to you setting boundaries. But with time, with commitment, with consistency, it actually gets better because you see the impact of boundary setting to your mental health actually.
Yeah, and it totally depends, like you said, because I've also heard like stories where people struggle with their mental health, especially people who, like, for example, have like schizophrenia or ADHD and all these like diagnosed mental disorders, and it's very difficult to explain this to their parents, right? And they don't understand the concept of boundaries. So it's not gonna be like, oh, just one conversation and they'll understand, tomorrow will be okay. And it takes so long. It's
an ongoing learning and unlearning actually, because like I said, they probably came from a generation of survival. They did not know the concept of boundaries, which is why if you have the time, try and observe your parents or even someone who's elderly and try and see that they still have those traits very deeply ingrained in them. You know, for example, even if someone elderly comes over to my house, till this day and age, my parents, they are so particular about me greeting them. You have to greet them. You have to sit there. You have to hear them out, even if I have absolutely no interest in sitting there, because there's this belief and this concept that you must be very filial towards the elderly. Right.
It's so ingrained in Asian culture.
Exactly.
And coming back to what I said, right, it takes a lot of time, and I think one of the things that might also be helpful is that tell your parents like, okay, this is what I'm going through, and this is how you can respond to if I'm going through a struggle, and this is what you can do to help me. So they have an idea like, okay, this is what I can do, right?
Yeah, essentially is to hear the child out, even to hear the parents out. Right? And to try and manage each other's expectations. If anything, try and respond and not react.
Right. And it takes like months, years, sometimes. Like you said, sometimes it will end up to radical acceptance,
right?
But sometimes it can also have like a positive outcome, like, okay, they finally accepted it and they understand this, and they can go on with like understanding how my mental health works. So now that we're also talking more heavily on self-care, right, is it still possible to promote the idea of self-care within Malaysian culture without disrespecting the values of filial piety?
I think it is possible to promote the idea of self-care, because if self-care is needed for your mental and emotional sanity, then why not? Why wouldn't you do something that is good for you, right? Because a lot of the times we, particularly as Asians, we focus so much on physical health. Physical health is important, but mental and emotional health is equally as important, or if not more important, right? Because physically you may be able to walk, but if mentally, and emotionally you're not feeling good, you're not feeling great, how do you think it actually would push you to even come out of the bed? Because like I said just now, your thoughts affects your emotions, that contributes to your actions, right? So I would say that you can still be filial while practicing self-care that again includes healthy boundaries.
Right.
For example, like I said just now about the Saturday and Sunday lunches, right? You can still be filial, but at the same time, you can still practice self-care if that Sunday you just want to be a couch potato and just chill at home, because that actually recharges you again. Or for example, say if you're someone who just started working, right? So you're on a tight budget. You still want to be filial, but at the same time, you still want to practice self-care. So instead of maybe giving 1,000 ringgit to your parents monthly, speak to them, have an open dialogue with them, and tell them that, at least for now, can I just give you 500 ringgit first? You're still being filial, you're being dutiful,
right?
But for now, I can only give you 500. So that balance of the 500, you're investing in yourself. If I'm making sense to you, right? So why is it that you cannot be filial and you cannot take care of yourself at the same time?
You just have to meet somewhere in between,
exactly,
and see what works for your family, right?
Right.
Okay, so that is like more to the point of view from the child itself. But what advice can you give to parents who might struggle to understand the concept of boundaries?
I think firstly, like I said, I empathize with parents who does not understand the concept of boundaries, because like I said, maybe they did not know any better back then. But now you can make things better by understanding the concept of boundaries, right? Now, I understand that the word boundary may appear very superior or very harsh to parents who do not know what boundaries are all about. But if anything, it's the way you view it, right? If you view boundaries in a very healthy way, it can actually prove to be more purposeful or more useful for your relationship with your child. Because to start off with, it might cause you some short-term discomfort, that why is my child being so neglectful or abandoning me, right? But in the long term, imagine how secure, how fulfilling that relationship between you and your child would be if you understand what boundaries are and what boundaries your child is trying to advocate, right? So if anything, if you think about it, even in a household, you as a parent, you must have some boundaries, right? Even as a parent, and you would expect that your child would follow those boundaries and respect those boundaries of yours. Similarly, in that same household, you also have a child who's an individual with different personalities, different preferences, different likes, different dislikes, who also has boundaries of their own. So why wouldn't you also try and understand the boundaries that your child is coming from? If that would make sense to you. So ask yourself as parents, are you setting realistic and unrealistic expectations of your child? If anything, I would say, if you truly want to understand where your child is coming from, and you also want to express yourself as a parent, you sit your child down and you have an open dialogue with your child. You voice out your expectation and your wishes as a parent for that child, and then you also hear what the child has to say, what their expectations are, or what is it that they can do for the time being. Now you must try and listen to them, not with an intent to reply or to school them or to correct them, but with an intention to try and understand where they are coming from first. Right? So essentially ask yourself as parents, what is it that you want from your child? What good is that child to you if that child is not functional or mentally and emotionally available for you anymore? Isn't it counterproductive totally? Right?
And people definitely need to also detach the idea of like, how do I say, like, okay, if I don't do this, then if they don't do this, then that means that they don't love us. But it's actually the opposite. Like you said, if you view boundaries as a healthy way, then it's not that. It doesn't equal to less love or less caring. It's just that they also want to spend that some love and caring to themselves as well, so that they have a lot of energy to give back to you.
Exactly, because if parents can even put themselves in that position, then it helps them to to have self-awareness, to understand their children more. Because even as parents, when you set some boundaries, right, or even if you have some preferences, you expect your child to understand where you're coming from,
Yeah.
right? So why is it so different when it comes to the child? That's because maybe your parenting style is, like I say, it's very authoritarian, because you probably feel that you are superior. Your child has to, follow your boundaries, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
So it comes back to the parenting style and the dynamic again.
Right.
If you view your child also as a very important part of the household, then it's easier for you to understand the concept of boundaries, because boundary setting does not mean, like you said, the child has neglected you, abandoned you. If anything, the child should do it out of their own willingness, right? To want to be there for you, to want to be filial, to want to spend time with you. So boundary setting, again, if you view it in a different paradigm, it's actually very healthy, and it actually keeps you regulated.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so, okay, and kind of relating back to, like you said, radical acceptance, and sometimes it's just really difficult to connect with your parents. So how important is it for Malaysians dealing with mental health issues to build a strong support system outside of their family? And if so, like, how can they find this and build support system?
I think it's absolutely important, not only for Malaysians, but for anyone with or without mental health challenges, to actually build a strong support system outside of their family, right? Especially if the family is the contributing factor to their stresses, then what do? You will have to have an external support system, right?
Right.
Lucky are those who actually do have a very strong support system within their household as well. But even then, I would still encourage you to actually have an external support system, because at least that way you get different perspectives from people of different walks of lives and experiences that maybe your family might not possess, right? So if you ask me, I think it is very, very important for them to actually have this support system outside of their family system.
Yeah.
And how can they find it? Well, the easiest ones I would say is, if you have friends, try friends first, try colleagues, try neighbors, basically try to go to people that maybe you feel comfortable with
And you can trust.
However, if you want it to be a little bit more private, a bit more confidential, and if you're willing to pay, then you can come to professional therapists, right?
Yeah.
Who obviously will tailor according to your needs, and would try their best to assist you wherever it's possible, right? If you are unable to pay, or even if you still want some confidentiality, then you can even go to NGOs, right? Like we have befrienders here in Malaysia, where they even offer telehealth, or you can even go to online forums where they have group supports. So there are many places that you can go to actually.
And find support, build your own support system, because a lot of people, they think that I think this also tied to culture. I don't think it's just Asians, just people in general. More people are starting to feel like, oh, they have to be independent, right? Okay, being an adult means you're independent and you can deal with everything alone. So no matter how tough it gets, but there's a difference between being able to take care of yourself and pushing yourself to the point of exhaustion, right? So how can we tell the difference between healthy independence and just neglecting your own needs?
I think maybe you can first try and assess and try and understand and reflect. Is this self-resilience or self-neglect? So are you being independent, or are you being resilient? Right? So firstly, someone who's highly independent, it would look like maybe that person is able to be functional, right? That person is able to do their daily task, without as much challenges. That person is able to make very, very objective decisions on their own. Right. So that person is able to function in for lack of a better word. Someone who's neglecting their own needs is someone who is already tired, is having a brain fog, is unable to do so on their own, and there is a support being offered. There are someone who's trying to help you out, but you refuse, or you find it a little bit hard to take that support because you're afraid of being judged, or you're afraid that they would think that what are you like? Are you not capable
Yeah.
of doing this? So then what you do is you push yourself further, thinking that you're being independent, but if anything, you're just trying to be very resilient, right? So you push yourself to a point where you're already burnt out, you're feeling already very overwhelmed. You don't even have the time to take a break. You don't even have the time to even incorporate any exercises.
Yeah.
So you're already at a point where you're neglecting yourself because now you're feeling mundane.
Right.
Right.
And that point, you're not living anymore, you're just surviving.
Exactly, or you're just breathing, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what I tend to tell even my clients, that ask yourself, are you actually living or are you just merely breathing? Right? So because if you're at a point where you're already just breathing, you're even languishing means you're just like,
Whatever.
yeah, whatever. Then it's concerning. So that shows that this is not highly independent anymore.
Yeah.
This is someone who has totally neglected their needs, right? So they need to take a break. They need to pause. Even though it's great that you know what your strengths are, what your capabilities are, but it's also okay for you to identify what your limitations are. It's okay for you to take a break because, as much as you're trying to thrive for achievements, you're only burning yourself out. So ultimately ask yourself, who is it that you're trying to prove this to?
Right.
Right?
True. And we've covered a lot about this topic, cultural, family, mental health today, right? And for listeners who might be feeling trapped in a toxic environment, what are some basic self-care practices or things that they can do, right, to start implementing right now to support their mental well-being?
Well, thank you, for having me, and I hope that I have brought some clarity for those who needed the clarity.
Yeah.
It is a very tough situation to be in if you're in a toxic environment, especially if it's with loved ones. It is really you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? But there are a number of things that you will have to do for yourself, and it's important that you prioritize yourself, right?
Right.
So firstly, again, I will repeat and I will reinstate the importance of healthy boundaries. So what you can do is first try limiting conversations with people who are toxic. I know it's very tough, but this is something that I myself do, even if it's with someone who I'm familiar with. If that person is very toxic to a point that it affects my state of mind, I do not go cold turkey, because sometimes it's not easy to just go cold turkey with someone. So you try and limit your interactions, you try and limit yourself being in front of that person. You try and pick your battles here, if that makes sense, right? Other than that, I also like to incorporate a lot of exercises. I think exercise is something that people take very lightly of.
Right.
If anything, these are endorphins that releases stress, and it even try to reduce your anxiety. So you don't have to do like a 2-hour rigorous, like a gym workout. It could be even just 30 minutes walking out, right? Going for a walk, or even doing something that basically brings you some sort of peace, and it actually helps you to live and be in the moment.
Right.
So the other things that you can try and do is try and be present in the moment, right? So I like to apply this thing where I observe, I describe, and then I participate in it. So I like to observe what's going on, then I describe what's going on, and then I participate in that activity. It actually helps me it brings me back to a sense of awareness. It brings me back to the present moment. So these are some of your self-care, strategies that you can try and apply. And also, because we are in the world of technology, so try and limit the use of social media if you can,
Right.
because this day and age, there's so much negativity on the news, and so much of negativity even on social media, or even we have pop influencers, who are self-proclaimed therapists, who are constantly asking you to look out for red flags in this, red flags in that. If anything, your entire life then would appear like a red flag, right? So you're constantly looking at negativity. So if you can, try and limit your social media usage as well. So these are some of the factors, or some of the self-care tips that I can tell you.
Yeah.
Ultimately, Fauza, I think it's very important for you to prioritize yourself,
Right.
and to take a break. And that does not make you weak, it does not make you selfish. It makes you a human being,
Yeah.
right? Because obviously you matter, and if things do get a little bit overwhelming, and one of the ways that you can even apply self-care is through words of affirmations. So tell yourself that, I'm trying my best, I'm doing my best, and my best is good enough for now at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
That's wonderful advice. I feel like it's a personal advice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and like you said, ultimately, it's you have to put yourself first. Once you know that you are important, then only then you can find balance between, what matters to you and how you can manage your own self-care activities and what you can do to improve your mental health, right?
Yeah.
But you have to put yourself first, no matter what.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that concludes our conversation on mental health and cultural influences in Malaysia. So a sincere thank you to Ms. Gurmin for joining
so
our
much,
podcast.
Fauza, for having me. Like I say, I hope I brought some sort of clarity and ease to
Of
whoever
course.
was listening to
Yeah,
this.
yeah. I'm sure this will be really helpful, I think, because this is the first time we really talked about cultural. Usually we talk more generically on, mental health and diagnosis and stuff like that, but this is very different than usual. So I'm sure that a lot of people will find this really helpful. So thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Right. So for those interested in learning more about Ms. Gurmin's work, you can check our description. We'll link her profile in the description. And as usual, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on YouTube and check us out on most podcast platforms. You should also follow us on social media. But until then, I think that's all. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.